Welcome to Everyday English with Annie. Imagine spending 30 years of your life as, well, a complete and utter deadbeat.
Right. Just completely broke.
Yeah, you are broke, you are angry, you spend your days filing letters in a post office, and your nights just drinking your paycheck away.
And getting rejected by literally everyone.
Right, exactly. You are rejected by everyone. Then, miraculously, at age 50, you get a book deal. You become a millionaire. You are, the ultimate success story. So what do you put on your tombstone?
Big final message.
Right. And the guy we are talking about today, he chose just two words. He chose, don't trouble.
It is, it's the ultimate paradox.
Yeah.
And it perfectly sets the stage for the prompt we're exploring today. Because, well, you sent us a message looking to practice your mindset alongside your English listening skills, and you asked this fantastic, honestly incredibly loaded question.
Yeah, it's a big one.
You asked, how can you avoid failure?
So, to tackle your prompt, we are diving into a stack of notes from Mark Manson's wildly counterintuitive book, The Subtle Art of Not Giving a F-star Fk. Such a good book.
It really is. And our mission for this deep dive, and this is tailored specifically for you, by the way, is to completely flip your perspective. We're going to explore why trying to avoid failure is actually the exact thing that causes you to fail in the first place.
Right, which sounds crazy, but to understand that, we need to go back to the guy with "Don't Try" on his tombstone.
Yeah, who was that?
That is the American writer Charles Bukowski. So for decades, his work was rejected by, almost every magazine and publisher he submitted to. They called his writing crude, disgusting. By all conventional societal metrics, the guy was a complete failure.
But then an editor at this small independent publishing house took this weird interest in him, right?
Yeah, exactly.
So Bukowski quits his post office job. I think he actually said he decided to starve instead of going crazy. And he writes his first novel in 3 weeks.
3 weeks. It's just 3 weeks. And he went on to sell over 2 million books. So the natural assumption here, like the story we all want to hear, is that this is the classic American dream. He never gave up, he persisted, he finally believed in himself, and, he won.
Right. That is the narrative we are totally conditioned to expect, but that completely misses the reality of Bukowski's situation.
How so?
Well, his success didn't come from suddenly becoming, like, a better person or adopting some positive mindset. Even after he was famous, he still showed up to poetry readings completely intoxicated, and he would openly insult his audience.
Oh, wow. So fame didn't fix his flaws at all.
Not even a little bit.
Then why on earth would a highly successful author put "Don't Try" on his grave? How does not trying lead to selling millions of books? What is the actual mechanism there?
So the mechanism is this radical acceptance, abandoning the desperate need to be a best-selling, respected author. It just eliminated his fear of judgment.
Oh, I see.
Bukowski succeeded precisely because he accepted that he was a failure. He wrote with this unfiltered, ugly, raw honesty. Because, well, he had nothing to lose and wasn't trying to impress anyone.
Right, he didn't give a thought to conventional success.
Exactly, which allowed him to produce work that was just entirely authentic.
Man, that goes against basically every piece of conventional self-help advice we hear today. We are constantly bombarded with messages telling us to be happier, be healthier, be richer, be a faster learner.
Oh, constantly.
But Manson points out that this constant fixation on the positive, on wanting things to be better, is actually fixating on what you lack.
Which brings us to the philosopher Alan Watts. He coined something called the backwards law.
The backwards law. Okay, what's that?
So Watts proposed that the desire for a more positive experience is, in itself, a negative experience. And paradoxically, the acceptance of one's negative experience is actually a positive experience.
Okay, wait, let me make sure I'm wrapping my head around this, because I want to relate this back to our listener. Are we saying that if you spend all day desperately wishing you were already like a fluent English speaker, the very act of wishing is just reinforcing the idea that you currently aren't good enough?
Exactly. Nailed it. The more you desperately want to be rich or smart or successful, the poorer, dumber, and more unworthy you feel.
Regardless of your actual reality.
Right. Pursuing something only highlights the huge gap between where you are and where you want to be.
So wanting positive is negative, and accepting negative is positive. That is such a brain bender.
It really is. And if you fight that reality, you end up in this psychological trap that Manson calls the feedback loop from hell.
Oh, I love this concept. It's like, think about staring at your phone waiting for a text message from someone you really like.
Oh, the worst feeling.
Right, and they don't reply. So you get anxious. Then you realize, wait, I'm getting anxious over a simple text message, and you start wondering why you're so needy.
And now you're anxious about being anxious.
Exactly. It's the feedback loop from hell.
We see this constantly. You get angry at yourself for getting angry. You feel guilty about feeling
It's
guilty.
exhausting.
It is. And our modern culture, driven by consumerism and these perfectly curated social media feeds, it's bred a generation that believes having negative experiences like anxiety, fear, guilt is somehow a flaw.
Right, because when you see everyone else seemingly living their best lives online, it's almost impossible not to feel like there's something like biologically wrong with you when you feel sad.
Which is exactly where you have to short-circuit the loop. You just have to accept that the world is messy, you are going to feel bad sometimes, and that is fundamentally okay.
And to help us visualize this, Manson introduces a superhero that I am absolutely obsessed with.
Yes. Disappointment Panda.
Disappointment Panda. He is not the hero we want, but he is the hero we desperately need.
So true.
Yeah.
Just imagine a guy in a cheesy eye mask and this superhero shirt that is way, way too small for his big panda belly.
And his superpower is going door to door, basically telling people the harsh truths they need to hear but refuse to accept, right?
That's his whole deal.
So what kind of harsh truths is this cursing, heavy metal playing panda dropping on people's doorsteps?
Well, the core truth is that problems never cease. They just never go away.
Yeah.
They only upgrade.
Wait, they upgrade?
Yeah. Think about it. Warren Buffett has money problems,
Yeah.
and a homeless person has money problems. Buffett just has much, much better money problems.
Okay, that makes sense.
The prevailing myth is that happiness is an equation you can just solve. Like that once you get the right job or find the right partner or learn the right language, your problems will just vanish and you'll be happy forever.
But the panda says otherwise.
The panda says happiness doesn't come from a lack of problems, it comes from solving them. The solution to today's problem is literally just the foundation for tomorrow's problem.
Okay, hold on. I need to push back on this a little bit, just on behalf of our listener. If we adopt the Bukowski mindset and we don't try, and we just accept the panda's premise that life is full of endless upgrading problems, how do we ever achieve anything?
That's a fair question.
Because if I'm listening to this right now to practice my English and improve my career prospects, shouldn't I be trying? This whole philosophy sounds, frankly, incredibly depressing. It kind of sounds like giving up.
I completely understand why it sounds that way at first glance. But the psychological shift here is actually incredibly liberating.
How so?
Well, it's not about lacking goals or lacking ambition. It's about changing the metrics by which you evaluate your life. You can't hope for a life without problems, but you can actively choose a life full of good problems.
Okay, so since problems are inevitable anyway.
Exactly. The difference between success and failure comes down entirely to how we measure our experiences.
So it's about choosing better problems and better ways to measure them. Let's ground this in a real-world example. Manson highlights two musicians in the book who experienced almost the exact same massive, humiliating failure, but they had totally different outcomes purely because of their internal metrics.
Yeah, this is a perfect comparison. Let's start with Dave Mustaine.
Right. So back in 1983, Dave Mustaine was this wildly talented lead guitarist who got kicked out of his band right before they were scheduled to record their very first album.
Brutal timing.
No warning, no discussion. He was literally handed a bus ticket home. And on that agonizing cross-country bus ride, he just vowed to start a new band, be faster, be heavier, and basically bathe in the tears of the guys who betrayed him.
And the crazy thing is, he actually pulled it off.
He really did. He formed Megadeth. They sold over 25 million records, toured the world for decades, and he became recognized as one of the most brilliant, influential musicians in heavy metal history.
So most people would look at that and say he wildly succeeded.
Most people would. But the band that kicked him out happened to be Metallica, who went on to sell over 180 million albums.
Yeah, that's a big difference.
And in this intimate interview from 2003, despite his millions of dollars, his adoring fans, and his undeniable musical legacy, Mustaine broke down in tears and admitted he still considered himself a failure.
That is just heartbreaking. He had everything. But because his metric for success was be more successful than Metallica, he was doomed to fail.
Yep. Even with 25 million records sold, his own metric made him miserable.
Now contrast Mustaine's story with Pete Best.
Oh, this one is fascinating.
In 1962, Pete Best was the drummer for another up-and-coming band. And he was widely considered the best-looking member, the most popular of the fans. But just 3 days before recording their first major record, The other members had their manager awkwardly fire him,
So rough.
and they replaced him with a guy named Ringo Starr.
Oh man, he got kicked out of the Beatles right before Beatlemania swept the entire globe. That is a historic level of missing out.
It absolutely is. And Best fell into a deep, dark depression initially. By 1968, he even attempted to end his own life.
Oh wow, I didn't realize it got that dark.
It did. But fast forward a few decades, and in a 1994 interview, Best said something totally shocking. He claimed he was actually happier than he would have been if he had stayed with the Beatles.
Wait, how is that even possible? How does someone go from being suicidal over losing the biggest gig in history to being genuinely grateful it happened?
Because his values fundamentally shifted. The circumstances of getting kicked out of the band forced his life in a completely new direction. It led him to meet his wife, have children, and build a quiet, stable family life.
Oh, I see.
His metric changed from being the biggest rock star in the world, which is highly dependent on external factors, to something he could actually control, being a loving father and husband.
So Mustaine had worldly success but felt like a failure, and Best had worldly failure but felt like an immense success. You know, this reminds me of playing a video game. Measuring your life with bad values is like playing a game where someone else holds the controller, the rules keep changing, and the score just resets randomly.
Yes. You are going to be miserable no matter how hard you play.
But good values mean you code your own game. You decide what points are actually worth.
That is a perfect analogy. Manson breaks down this distinction very clearly. Bad values are reliant on external events, they are socially destructive, and most importantly, they are not controllable.
Like what?
Things like pure pleasure, material success, always needing to be right, or, forcing yourself to stay positive all the time.
Whereas good values are internal, reality-based, and controllable right now, like in this exact moment. Values like honesty, vulnerability, curiosity, standing up for others.
Right, because if your value is honesty, you can choose to be honest right this second. You succeed immediately.
But if your value is being a millionaire, you can't necessarily choose to achieve that right this second, leaving you feeling like a failure.
Exactly. When we have poor values, we are constantly giving our finite energy to things that actually make our lives worse. We are basically choosing terrible problems.
Oh wait, this brings up a huge dilemma for me.
Okay, what is it?
If we are the ones coding our own game with these internal values, what happens when someone else unplugs the console? Like, what happens when a tragedy hits that is completely out of our control? How can we possibly be responsible for that?
Yeah, that is honestly the hardest pill to swallow in this entire philosophy. To understand it, we look at William James, a young man in the 19th century who suffered from just terrible health issues.
Like, what kind of issues?
Eye spasms, back pain, and this deep, paralyzing depression. His family was constantly disappointed in him. He was suicidal. But one night, while reading philosophy, he decided to conduct a radical experiment.
What did he do?
He decided he would spend one entire year taking 100% responsibility for everything that occurred in his life, no matter what. He would act as if he had the power to change his circumstances, regardless of the likelihood of failure, and totally regardless of who caused the initial problem.
And the legend is that if it didn't work after a year, he was going to end his life. But it did work.
It did.
He went on to become the father of American psychology, teaching at Harvard and touring the world. He called this experiment his rebirth. But how does taking responsibility cure paralysis like that? What is the actual cognitive shift happening in the brain?
So the shift happens when you untangle what Manson calls the fault/responsibility fallacy. We naturally assume that if something isn't our fault, it isn't our responsibility.
Right, because it's not fair.
But those are two entirely different concepts.
Yeah.
Fault is past tense. It results from choices that have already been made, often by other people. But responsibility is present tense. It results from the choices you are making every single second of every day.
Manson uses a really extreme example for this in the book that I think illustrates it perfectly. Imagine you wake up one morning, you open your front door to get the mail, and you find that someone has left a newborn baby on your doorstep.
Just sitting there. Now, it is absolutely not your fault that the baby is there. You didn't choose that. You didn't cause that. But it is immediately your responsibility to decide what to do next.
Hold up, I'm going to push back hard on this one. If someone leaves a baby on my porch, I'm absolutely not taking responsibility for raising it. I am calling the police. I'm calling child services. That is not my problem to solve long term.
But you see, calling the police is taking responsibility for your response.
Oh.
The point isn't that you are now required to raise the baby. The point is you cannot just ignore it. You can't just close the door and go back to bed. Whether you keep it, call the authorities, or ask a neighbor for help, you are actively making a choice. You are responsible for the action you take in response to that event.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. The initial event is not my fault, but my reaction, what I do with the hand I've been dealt, is entirely my responsibility.
Yeah.
Waiting for the person at fault to fix the problem is a recipe for endless misery because they usually aren't coming back to fix it.
An incredibly powerful, real-world example of this distinction is Malala Yousafzai. In 2012, when she was just 14 years old, she was shot in the face by a Taliban soldier simply for speaking out about her right to go to school.
It was a horrific tragedy, and obviously it was entirely not her fault that she was attacked.
Completely not her fault, but she took complete responsibility for her response. She didn't choose to hide or give up or let the trauma dictate her future in silence.
Right.
She used the horrific experience to fuel a global fight for education, eventually becoming the youngest ever Nobel Prize laureate. Taking responsibility for your problems is the very first step to solving them.
So let's bring this back to you, our listener. Let's say you accept that you are responsible. You realize you've been using bad metrics, and you've decided to take ownership of your response. But what if you are just stuck?
Like paralyzed.
Yeah. What if you know you need to practice your English grammar? Or you know you need to quit a toxic job, but you sit there entirely paralyzed by the fear of failing at the very first step?
This is where we run into what Manson hilariously calls the VCR analogy.
Oh, I love this part.
Think back to when older generations first got a VCR for their televisions. They would stare at the blinking clock, totally bewildered, and ask, but how do I use it?
Oh my gosh, yes. My parents used to stare at the remote control like it was an alien artifact.
Right. Meanwhile, a 6-year-old kid would just walk up, mash all the buttons, probably ruin a tape or two, and figure it out in 5 minutes.
Exactly. From the outside, the answer to how do I use a VCR is just press a button. But adults do this with major life changes all the time.
All the time.
We ask, how do I quit my job? Or how do I end this bad relationship? From the outside, the answer is painfully simple. Just do it. Go fill out the paperwork. Say the words out loud.
But we treat those basic actions like they're these complex, unsolvable riddles. We ask how, because we are secretly terrified of the emotional pain of the immediate aftermath. We want the success without the thousands of tiny, embarrassing failures that build it.
Which is the greatest myth of all, isn't it?
It really is. Improvement at anything is based on thousands of tiny failures. If someone is better than you at speaking English or managing a business, it is almost certainly because they have failed at it vastly more times than you have.
There is a legendary story about Pablo Picasso that illustrates this perfectly. So, as an old man, he was sitting in a cafe in Spain, casually doodling on a paper napkin. A woman recognized him, saw the doodle, and asked if she could buy it.
And Picasso said, sure, $20,000.
And the woman was understandably shocked. She said, "What? It took you like 2 minutes to draw that?"
And Picasso replied, no, ma'am, it took me over 60 years to draw this.
So good. The swiftness of that drawing, the apparent ease of his success, it was built on an entire lifetime of crumpled papers, terrible paintings, and countless failures.
Which brings us to Manson's ultimate tool for breaking through the paralysis of failure. He calls it the do something principle.
So usually we think the cycle of productivity goes like this. You get struck by emotional inspiration, which leads to motivation, which finally leads to a desirable action. Inspiration, motivation, action.
Right.
So if you don't feel motivated, you assume you're just out of luck. You just sit on the couch waiting for a lightning bolt of inspiration to strike.
But what Manson realized is that action isn't just the effect of motivation, it's also the cause of it. It's an endless, self-sustaining loop. Action leads to inspiration, which leads to motivation, which leads to more action.
So if you're sitting there right now paralyzed because you don't have the motivation to study English today, or, you're terrified of sounding foolish when you speak, stop waiting for motivation.
Just reverse the flow. Action to inspiration to motivation. If you lack the motivation to make a change, just do something.
Anything. Write 2 terrible, grammatically incorrect sentences. Read 1 paragraph. Say 1 word out loud.
Exactly. Harness the reaction to that tiny action to begin motivating yourself.
There is just so much freedom in that mindset. If you are terrified of failing, you just change your metric for success. If your only metric for success today is simply taking an action, just writing those 2 crappy words, then failure becomes completely impossible.
Because the act of failing itself pushes you forward.
Exactly. The action generates the inspiration for the next step.
When the standard of success becomes merely acting, When any result, even a super clumsy one, is regarded as progress, we propel ourselves ahead. We feel free to fail, and that freedom short-circuits the anxiety.
You aren't focused on a grand, uncontrollable outcome like becoming perfectly fluent overnight.
No, you are just focused on the immediate, controllable action right in front of you.
So, to wrap this all up for you, our listener, and to directly answer your prompt, how can you avoid failure?
The blunt, undeniable answer is
You can't. And you really truly shouldn't want to. You short-circuit the fear of failure by choosing better, controllable values. You take 100% responsibility for your response to the hand you are dealt, totally regardless of whose fault it is.
and you use the do something principle to act your way into inspiration, just recognizing that success is really just a mountain built on thousands of tiny accepted failures.
So well said.
And if we want to tie a bow on this whole philosophy of metrics and values, we kind of have to look at Manson's ultimate metric for life, which is our mortality.
Oh, this is the heavy part.
It is, but it's important. He writes about a moment standing on a cliff at the Cape of Good Hope, confronting the sheer, terrifying drop below. Death is the only thing we can know with absolute certainty. And because it scares us, we do everything in our power to avoid thinking about it.
But avoiding it is the trap.
It is the trap. Confronting the reality of our own mortality is the one thing that obliterates all the fragile, superficial values we cling to. Without acknowledging that our time is limited, the superficial things appear incredibly important, and the genuinely important things appear superficial.
So acknowledging that cliff edge strips away all the entitlement, all the petty grievances, and all the paralyzing fear of what other people might think of you.
Which leaves us with a final thought for you to mull over as you continue practicing your English and navigating your own path.
Think about that cliff edge. If you remembered right now that your time on Earth is strictly limited, and that your next 10 failures are simply the required currency to buy your ultimate success.
What is the very first thing you would rush out to fail at today?